I'm Lorraine, 58 years old, and I've always believed that being a mother was the greatest gift life could give me. My son Andrew has grown into a successful corporate attorney, climbing the ladder faster than I could have imagined. We've had our ups and downs lately, with his new lifestyle creating distance between us. But when he invited me to his birthday celebration at one of the city's most exclusive venues, I thought things might change. I had no idea that night would shatter and rebuild my world all at once. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear stories that might just change how you see your own relationships. The morning Andrew was born remains the clearest memory of my life. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine as I promised him I'd give him the world. His father walked out when Andrew was only 3 years old, leaving me with a mountain of bills, a broken heart, and a toddler who didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. I never spoke ill of his father, just rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I took on 3 jobs at once: administrative assistant during weekdays, waitressing nights, and bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But no matter how exhausted I was, I always made time to read to Andrew before bed, help with his homework, and attend every school function. Those moments were sacred to me. Andrew was a bright child. By 5th grade, his teachers were suggesting advanced programs in private schools that could nurture his potential. The tuition costs made my stomach sink, but I found a way. I took out loans, applied for every scholarship possible, and picked up even more work. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment where I slept on the pull-out couch so Andrew could have the bedroom to study in peace. "Mom, I don't need to go to Westlake Prep," Andrew told me when I showed him the acceptance letter. "The public school is fine. Nothing is too good for you," I insisted, trying to hide how my hands trembled from working 70-hour weeks. "This is your future we're talking about." Through his teenage years, Andrew remained focused and determined. He graduated valedictorian of his class, earning a partial scholarship to a prestigious university. I still remember standing in the audience at his high school graduation, tears streaming down my face as he thanked me in his speech. "Without my mother's sacrifices, I wouldn't be standing here today," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "She taught me that with hard work and determination, anything is possible." Those words carried me through the next grueling years of helping him through undergraduate studies and then law school. I refinanced our small home twice, worked through pneumonia one winter, and skipped meals more often than I care to admit. But watching him walk across the stage to receive his law degree made everything worthwhile. The early years of his career were challenging. The prestigious firms weren't immediately calling, and Andrew faced rejection after rejection. I'd comfort him in our small living room, making his favorite comfort food as he worried about student loans and career prospects. "Your time will come," I assured him. "Your brilliance will be recognized." And it was. 3 years ago, Andrew landed a junior position at Sullivan & Pierce, one of the most elite corporate law firms in the city. The starting salary was more money than I'd ever seen. Within 2 years, he was moving up rapidly, taking on high-profile clients and earning bonuses that allowed him to move into a luxury apartment downtown. That's when things began to change between us. His calls became less frequent. Our Sunday dinners often canceled last minute due to work emergencies. When we did meet, he'd spend much of the time on his phone or telling me about his influential new friends. I noticed how he would sometimes wince when I used improper grammar or wore clothes that weren't in style. "Mom, "Why don't you let me buy you some new outfits?" he suggested, once eyeing my department store dress with barely concealed disapproval. "These clothes are perfectly fine," I said, though his comment stung. "I'm comfortable in them." When the invitation came for his 34th birthday party at the Atherton, the most exclusive hotel in the city, I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this was his way of bringing me back into his life. I spent weeks saving up to buy him a special gift. A vintage fountain pen I knew he'd admired in a shop window months earlier. I also splurged on a new dress, wanting to make him proud. The night before the party, I called him to confirm the details. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow, sweetie," I said. There was a pause on his end. "About that, Mom. This is going to be mostly work colleagues and some important clients. It's really a networking event as much as a birthday party." "I understand," I said, trying to mask my disappointment. "Just try to blend in, okay? These people are pretty sophisticated." I stayed up that night, practicing small talk in the mirror and researching current events so I could contribute intelligently to conversations. I wanted so badly to fit into this new world he inhabited, to still be someone he was proud to call his mother. As I drifted off to sleep, I imagined a wonderful evening of watching my son shine among his peers, perhaps even sharing a moment where he would publicly thank me for helping him reach such heights. How wrong those expectations would prove to be. The Atherton Hotel gleamed with old money elegance as I handed my 15-year-old Toyota to the valet, who struggled to hide his surprise that such a vehicle would dare appear at this establishment. I smoothed down my new dress, navy blue with a modest neckline, and checked my makeup one last time in my compact mirror before walking through the grand entrance. The ballroom took my breath away, with its crystal chandeliers and marble columns. Servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and appetizers I couldn't pronounce. I spotted Andrew, immediately standing tall and handsome in an expertly tailored suit, surrounded by a small crowd of admirers. My heart swelled with pride as I approached. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, reaching up to hug him. Andrew's body stiffened at my touch. He gave me a quick, perfunctory embrace before stepping back. "Mom, you made it," he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, holding out the carefully wrapped gift. He took it without looking at it and handed it to a server. "Can you put this with the others? Thanks." Before I could say anything else, a stunning woman with honey blonde hair and a red designer dress slipped her arm through Andrew's. "Aren't you going to introduce us, darling?" she asked, with a smile that seemed practiced. "Right, of course. Mom, this is Jessica Winters. Jessica, this is my mother." Jessica extended a manicured hand. "So nice to finally meet you. Andrew has told me, well, not much, actually." She laughed as if she'd made a charming joke. "Lovely to meet you, too," I said, ignoring the slight. "How did you two meet?" "Charity gala for the Children's Hospital," Jessica replied. Andrew made quite the impression with his generous donation. I blinked in surprise. Andrew had never mentioned any interest in children's charities before. "Jessica's father is Judge Winters." Andrew added his tone, suggesting I should recognize the name. "Oh, how wonderful," I said, though I had no idea who that was. Jessica looked me up and down with a subtle assessment. "That's an interesting dress. Is it vintage?" "It's new, actually," I said, feeling my cheeks warm. "From Carson's department store." A flicker of amusement crossed her face. "How quaint. Andrew, we should circulate. The Hendersons just arrived." Andrew nodded. Help yourself to food and drinks, Mom. I need to greet some important clients. I watched them glide away, Jessica whispering something in his ear that made him laugh. Standing alone, I felt conspicuously out of place. My new dress, which had seemed so appropriate in the store, now felt cheap and awkward among the designer gowns surrounding me. Throughout the next hour, Andrew remained distant, circling the room with Jessica, but never bringing me along to introduce me to his colleagues. When we did cross paths, his introductions were brief and vague. "This is Lorraine," with no mention of our relationship. I tried to engage with others on my own. "How do you know Andrew?" I asked a group of young attorneys. "We work with him at the firm," one replied. "Are you a family friend?" "I'm his mother," I said. Their surprise was poorly concealed. "Oh, he's never mentioned. That is, it's lovely to meet you." The conversation quickly died, and they found reasons to move away. This pattern repeated itself throughout the evening. People being polite, but clearly surprised by my presence and unsure how to interact with me. A kind server named Miguel noticed my isolation and made special efforts to keep my glass filled and offer me the best appetizers. "You should try these stuffed mushrooms, ma'am," he said warmly. "They're the chef's specialty." "Thank you," I said, grateful for the simple human kindness. "Is the birthday boy your son?" Miguel asked, nodding toward Andrew. "Yes," I said with a sad smile. "He's done very well for himself." "You must be very proud." "More than I can say." As the evening progressed, I found myself retreating to a quiet corner, watching the celebration from afar. Andrew seemed completely in his element, laughing and charming everyone around him. I barely recognized this polished, somewhat calculating version of my son. The boy who once cried in my arms when he didn't make the debate team seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who looked at me as if I were a stranger. I considered leaving early, but something kept me rooted to my spot. This was still my son's birthday. I still loved him, even if he seemed embarrassed by my presence. So I stayed nursing a single glass of champagne, trying to look comfortable in my isolation. My father was determined I'd follow in his footsteps. Andrew's voice carried across the room as he spoke to a small group of attentive listeners. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but my curiosity drew me closer while remaining just out of his line of sight. "Harvard Law was practically predetermined from birth," he continued with a casual laugh. "The family tradition, you know." I froze, my champagne flute halfway to my lips. Andrew's father had been a truck driver who hadn't finished high school, and the only college tradition in our family had started with Andrew himself. "Your father must be very proud," said an older gentleman in an expensive suit. "He would have been," Andrew replied smoothly, a practiced note of solemnity in his voice. "He passed while I was in my second year at Harvard. Heart attack on the golf course. At least he went doing what he loved." My hand trembled so badly, I had to set down my glass. Andrew's father, as far as I knew, was very much alive, somewhere in Arizona with his second family. He certainly had never played golf and had never so much as sent a birthday card after he left, let alone paid a dime, toward Harvard. "And your childhood home?" asked a woman dripping in diamonds. "Andrew mentioned an estate in Connecticut," Jessica cut in smoothly. "The Fairfield property. His mother still lives there, rattling around in that big old place all alone. We keep telling her to get a smaller place in the city, don't we, darling?" Andrew nodded. "Some people just can't let go of the past." I backed away before I could be seen nearly bumping into a waiter. Our property had been a small 2-bedroom rental in a working-class neighborhood. I'd managed to save enough for a modest down payment on a small house in the suburbs, only after Andrew finished law school. My mind reeled as I sought refuge in a quiet alcove. Why would Andrew fabricate such an elaborate lie? Was he so ashamed of our humble beginnings that he needed to invent a privileged past? Had he been telling these tales since starting at the firm? The weight of this discovery pressed against my chest. Every sacrifice I had made, the multiple jobs, the nights without sleep, the meals skipped to afford his books, had apparently been deemed unworthy of acknowledgement. Instead, he had created a fictional father to give him the pedigree he thought he needed. I was jarred from my thoughts by Jessica's voice nearby. Honestly, couldn't she have made more of an effort? She was saying to a friend, not realizing I could hear. That dress looks like it came from a discount bin. And did you see her shoes? Is that really Andrew's mother? Her friend whispered. She seems so ordinary. Tell me about it, Jessica replied. Andrew never talks about her. Now I understand why. I gripped the wall to steady myself, the words hitting like physical blows. Jessica spotted me then and realized I had overheard. Instead of embarrassment, her expression showed only mild annoyance at being caught. Lorraine, she said, approaching me with false warmth. There you are. Are you enjoying yourself? Very much. I lied, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of seeing my pain. You know, she said, lowering her voice, these events tend to run quite late. Business discussions and all that. You must be getting tired. No one would think anything of it if you wanted to head home early. The message was clear. I was an inconvenience, a blemish on their perfect evening. Thank you for your concern, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. But I'd like to stay for the cake. It is my son's birthday, after all. A flash of irritation crossed her face. Suit yourself, but try to blend in a bit more, will you? Andrew's boss just arrived, and first impressions are so important. She glided away, leaving me with my dignity in tatters. I considered her suggestion to leave, wondering if it might indeed be better for Andrew if I disappeared. But something inside me rebelled at the thought. I had earned my place in my son's life through years of sacrifice and unconditional love. I would not be chased away by uncomfortable glances and whispered comments. Through the crowd, I noticed a distinguished-looking man in his 60s entering the ballroom. The immediate reaction of those around him, the deferential nods, the eager approaches, made it clear this was someone of significant importance. Andrew's entire demeanor changed as he hurried across the room to greet the new arrival. This, I realized, must be the boss Jessica had mentioned. I watched as Andrew led the man around the room, introducing him to various guests, with obvious deference. The man carried himself with natural authority, but seemed genuinely interested in each person he spoke with. I wondered if Andrew would introduce me to this man, or if I would remain the secret kept in the corner all evening. As they moved through the crowd in what seemed like a carefully choreographed circuit of the room, I steeled myself for either possibility, determined to maintain what remained of my dignity, regardless of what came next. The moment arrived with an inevitability that felt almost scripted. Andrew, with Jessica, clinging to his arm, and the distinguished older man beside them, finally approached the corner where I'd been standing much of the evening. And who might this be? The older man asked, his keen eyes landing on me with genuine curiosity. I extended my hand, ready to introduce myself as Andrew's mother, despite the evening's pattern suggesting he preferred I didn't. But before I could speak, Andrew cleared his throat. This is Lorraine, he said, his voice taking on an oddly dismissive tone I'd never heard before. "She's just our housekeeper." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. My hand hung suspended in the air as I struggled to process what I'd just heard. "We let her stay for the party out of pity." Andrew continued, his voice light, as if making a joke that everyone should find amusing. "She's good with a mop." Jessica gave a tinkling laugh. "She's been with us for years, almost like family in a way." The room seemed to tilt around me. Blood rushed in my ears, and I felt a peculiar detachment, as if I were floating above the scene, watching this cruel theater play out. My son, the baby I had nursed through fevers, the boy whose science projects I had helped build at midnight, the young man whose law school applications I had proofread countless times, was erasing me. Worse than erasing me. He was reducing me to a servant, someone to be pitied and mocked. I forced my face into a rigid mask, determined not to break down in front of these people. My fingers had gone numb, but I managed to lower my hand to my side. Somehow I maintained eye contact with the older man, who was studying me with an increasingly puzzled expression. "A housekeeper," he repeated slowly, his gaze moving between Andrew and me. "Are you sure about that I know her?" Andrew's self-satisfied smile froze on his face. What do you mean, sir?" The older man took a step closer to me, his eyes narrowing slightly as he examined my face. Lorraine Porter, from Northwestern University, Department of English Literature." Something lurched in my chest, the sound of my maiden name, unspoken for so many years, and the reference to a life I had set aside long ago. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Though it's Lorraine Matthews now." The man's face broke into a warm smile. "I thought so, Professor Porter. It's Richard Thompson. I was in your American Modernism seminar in '89. Best class I ever took." The world had stopped making sense. My past and present were colliding in the most unexpected way. I peered more closely at the distinguished man before me, trying to reconcile him with the memory of students from decades ago. "Richard Thompson," I repeated, recognition slowly dawning. Front row always had insightful comments about Faulkner. "That's right." His eyes crinkled with genuine pleasure. "You remember." Andrew's face had drained of all color. Jessica's smile had become fixed and uncertain. "Professor Porter," she echoed, confusion evident in her voice. Before I had Andrew, I explained quietly. "I was a professor of literature at Northwestern. I was on track for tenure when I became pregnant." Richard turned to Andrew, his expression shifting to confusion. "You said she was your housekeeper." The guests nearby had fallen silent attention, drawn to our small drama. I could feel dozens of eyes on us, the quiet murmurs spreading through the room like ripples in still water. Andrew swallowed visibly. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. It was meant as a joke." "A joke," Richard repeated, his tone, making it clear he found nothing humorous in the situation. "About your mother being your housekeeper." The word hung in the air. Mother. Not housekeeper, not servant, not someone to be pitied. Mother. Jessica's arm had dropped from Andrew's, and she had taken a small step away from him, her social instincts clearly signaling this was a sinking ship to be abandoned. I stood perfectly still, emotions washing through me in waves too complex to untangle. Humiliation at how Andrew had presented me, vindication at having my past acknowledged, sorrow that it had come to this, and underneath it all, a slow-building anger that had been suppressed for far too long. Richard turned back, to me genuine respect in his eyes. Professor Porter, excuse me, Matthews, your lectures on Hemingway changed the way I read everything. In fact, it's largely because of your class that I pursued literature as more than just a minor. You were an exceptional student, I replied automatically, years of professional courtesy coming back to me. I had an exceptional teacher, he countered. Then, with evident confusion, he asked, but how did you go from tenure track at Northwestern to... He gestured vaguely, not wanting to repeat Andrew's offensive characterization. The party around us had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even those pretending not to listen were obviously straining to hear. Andrew looked like he might be physically ill. Life takes unexpected turns, I said simply. When Andrew was born, I made choices that prioritized his future over my career. The weight of those words and all they encompassed, the resignation letter I'd written with tears blurring my vision, the dreams I'd set aside, the identity I'd surrendered, settled around us like invisible dust. Richard's expression softened with understanding. Those must have been difficult choices. The most difficult, I acknowledged, and the most important. Andrew's breathing had become shallow and rapid. His perfect evening, his carefully constructed image, was crumbling before his eyes. The boss he so desperately wanted to impress was looking at him with growing disappointment. Andrew, Richard said, his tone now cool and professional. I think you and I need to have a conversation on Monday about the firm's values regarding family and integrity. With that simple statement, the power dynamic shifted entirely. Andrew, who moments ago had been holding court as the confident rising star, now looked small and uncertain. Sir, I can explain, he began desperately. I'm sure you'll try, Richard replied, then deliberately turned his back on Andrew to face me again. I'd love to hear what you've been doing all these years, Professor. Would you mind if we found a quieter spot to catch up? As Richard gently guided me away from the stunned silence surrounding Andrew and Jessica, I caught a glimpse of my son's face. For just a moment, beneath the panic and embarrassment, I thought I saw a flicker of the little boy who once looked at me as if I hung the moon and stars. But it was quickly gone, replaced by the mask of the stranger he had become. The weight of every eye in the room pressed against my back as Richard led me to a quieter corner. My legs moved mechanically, carrying me forward, while my mind struggled to process what had just happened. The elegant party continued around us, but I could hear the hushed whispers spreading like wildfire through the crowd. I'm so sorry about that, Richard said, once we were seated in a small alcove away from the main gathering. Truly appalling behavior. Thank you. I managed my voice steadier than I expected. It's been a surprising evening. I can only imagine. He signaled a waiter who promptly brought us fresh drinks. Tell me, how did you go from being one of the most promising young professors in the department to this situation? The genuine interest in his eyes gave me the courage to speak the truth I'd kept bundled inside for decades. When I found out I was pregnant with Andrew, his father made it clear he wasn't interested in being a parent. We weren't married, and my family was very traditional. They essentially disowned me. I took a sip of water, giving myself a moment. I was 28, newly pregnant, alone, and suddenly facing the reality that I couldn't manage 60-hour academic weeks while being a single mother. You gave up your career, Richard stated, not as a question, but as a recognition of sacrifice. I did what made sense at the time, I said. I resigned my position, took an administrative job with regular hours, and focused on giving Andrew the best life I could. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it became the life I chose every day. From across the room, I could see Andrew in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Jessica. Her body language screamed displeasure, her perfect features twisted into something much less attractive. "And now he's ashamed of you," Richard observed, following my gaze. The blunt assessment hurt, but I couldn't deny its truth. "It seems that way, yes. If you don't mind my asking, does he know what you gave up for him?" I considered the question carefully. He knows I worked hard to support him. He knows I put his education first. But I never wanted him to feel burdened by my choices. I never told him I was on track for tenure, or that his grandfather was the dean of the business school and cut me off when I refused to handle the pregnancy differently. Richard's eyebrows rose. "Dean Porter was your father. I had no idea." He made sure very few people knew. Having an unwed pregnant daughter didn't fit his image. "Like father, like son," Richard murmured, then looked immediately apologetic. "I'm sorry that was inappropriate." "But accurate," I acknowledged with a sad smile. The irony isn't lost on me. A commotion drew our attention back to the main room. Jessica had apparently decided she'd had enough of the evening and was making a dramatic exit, leaving Andrew standing alone, his carefully cultivated aura of success visibly crumbling. "I should go speak with him," I said, though the thought made my stomach clench. "Are you sure? After what he did, he's still my son." The simple truth of those words gave me strength. "And I think right now, he needs his mother more than his housekeeper." Richard stood, as I did, respect evident in his posture. "You're still the impressive woman I remember from those lecture halls, Professor Porter." "Matthews," I corrected gently. "Matthews," he agreed. "And if you ever want to guest lecture, my department would be honored to have you." The offer caught me completely by surprise. "You're Dean of Literature at Grayson University now," he said, with a modest shrug. "Nothing fancy like Northwestern, but we have some bright students who could benefit from your insights." "I haven't been in academia for over 30 years, I protested. "Some lights don't dim with time," he replied, simply, handing me his business card. "Think about it." With that unexpected gift tucked into my purse, I squared my shoulders and walked directly toward Andrew. The crowd parted for me, some faces showing pity, others a new respect. I ignored them all, focused only on the lost expression on my son's face. "Andrew," I said when I reached him, my voice quiet but firm. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," I interrupted. "But not here. I'm going home now." "Let me call you an Uber," he said quickly, reaching for his phone. "I drove here," I reminded him. "I'm perfectly capable of driving myself home." "At least, let me walk you to your car," he offered, desperation edging into his voice. I considered refusing, wanting nothing more than to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the party. But I nodded once, allowing him this small gesture. We walked in silence, through the hotel lobby, and out to the valet stand. Andrew gave them my ticket, and we waited in uncomfortable silence for my car to appear. "Mom, what I said was inexcusable," he finally blurted. "I don't know what I was thinking. It was a stupid joke that went too far." "It wasn't a joke, Andrew," I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "Jokes are funny. What you did was cruel and deliberate." "I panicked," he admitted. "Richard Thompson is not just my boss. He's the managing partner. His opinion determines everything about my future at the firm. I just..." I wanted him to see me a certain way. And that way didn't include having a mother who worked as an administrative assistant instead of coming from money and privilege. His silence was answer enough. My car arrived, old, practical, and painfully out of place among the luxury vehicles surrounding the hotel. The valet handed me the keys with professional courtesy. "We'll talk tomorrow," I told Andrew. "I need time to process this." "Are you okay to drive? You seem upset." The irony of his concern after what he'd done was almost too much. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Andrew. Tonight is no different." I got into my car and drove away, leaving him standing alone on the curb. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over as I navigated the empty, late-night streets. But beneath the hurt and humiliation, I felt something unexpected stirring to life. A sense of self I had almost forgotten existed. Professor Porter had been buried for decades beneath Lorraine Matthews Andrews' mother and sole support. Perhaps it was time to remember who I had been before I became only someone's mother. 3 days passed before I answered any of Andrew's increasingly desperate calls and messages. I needed that time to process my emotions, to move beyond the initial hurt and anger toward something more constructive. When I finally agreed to meet him at my home, I felt centered in a way I hadn't in years. He arrived, looking disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. Gone was the polished corporate attorney. In his place stood something closer to the boy I remembered. "Mom," he began as soon as I opened the door. "I'm so sorry. What I did was unforgivable." "Come in," I said, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. "I've made coffee." We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped him with homework and celebrated his college acceptance letter. The familiar setting seemed to unnerve him further. "Jessica broke up with me," he said, after a long silence. "She said she couldn't be with someone who would treat his mother that way. Said it showed poor character." I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly insightful of her." "She wasn't all bad," he muttered. "Just status conscious." "Like you've become," I observed without heat. He winced, but didn't deny it. "Richard Thompson called me into his office yesterday. The firm has a family values image they cultivate with clients. He said my behavior at the party demonstrated a concerning lack of integrity." "And what did you say to that?" "That he was right." Andrew stared into his coffee cup as if it might contain answers. "I've been put on probation, no client contact, for 3 months while I reassess my priorities. Andrew, I need to understand why. Not the excuse you gave at the party, but the real reason. When did you become ashamed of where you came from, of me?" He flinched at the direct question. "I'm not ashamed of you. Your actions suggest otherwise." After a long pause, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "When I first started at Sullivan and Pierce, everyone came from money and connections. Old families, private schools, summer homes. I was the scholarship kid who grew up in a rental with a single mom. They never said anything directly, but I could feel the difference. So you invented a different past." He nodded miserably. "Small lies at first, making it sound like we lived in a better neighborhood, implying my father had been successful before he left. Then the lies grew. I couldn't stop. Each new lie required 3 more to support it. And I became the housekeeper because I panicked," he admitted. "Jessica had been talking about my estate in Connecticut to everyone. Then you showed up, and you were so obviously not what I'd described to everyone. I just reacted. It was horrible and inexcusable. I absorbed his explanation, understanding the insecurity behind it, even as I remained hurt by the choices he'd made. "Did you know," I said finally, "that before you were born, I was on track to become one of the youngest tenured professors at Northwestern?" Andrew's head snapped up. What? What Richard Thompson said was true. I was a professor of literature. My dissertation on feminine narrative voice in modernist literature was being considered for publication. I had my whole career mapped out. But you never told me. You always said you worked in offices. I did. After you were born, I resigned my position when I was 5 months pregnant because I knew I couldn't manage a tenure track and single motherhood simultaneously. I took administrative jobs because they had regular hours and benefits. Andrew looked stunned. Grandfather Porter. He was the business school dean Richard mentioned. Yes, he disowned me when I refused to give you up for adoption or get an abortion. My academic colleagues gradually lost touch. I built a new life, focused entirely on giving you opportunities. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I never wanted you to feel like a burden or an obstacle to my dreams. You became my new dream, Andrew. I chose you consciously and completely. I never regretted that choice. Tears welled in his eyes. But all those years of struggle, working multiple jobs, if you had stayed in academia, we can't rewrite the past, I said gently. And despite everything, I'm proud of the choices I made. What hurts is not that I gave up a promising career, but that you've become ashamed of the life we built together. Andrew covered his face with his hands. I've been so focused on climbing the ladder that I forgot how I got to the first rung. Everything I am, everything I've achieved is because of you. We talked for hours that day. Truly talked for the first time in years. He shared the insecurities that had driven him to create a fictional past. I told him stories of my academic life that I'd kept hidden, including how his father, a graduate student I'd briefly dated, had wanted nothing to do with an unplanned pregnancy. I need to make this right, Andrew said as evening approached. With you, with Richard, with everyone at the firm. That won't be easy, I warned. The truth rarely is. I know, but I want to be someone you can be proud of again. Someone who deserves the sacrifices you made. Start by being honest, I advised. With yourself first, then with others. As Andrew prepared to leave, he hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I lost sight of what matters. I love you too, I replied. But Andrew, things need to change between us. I can't go back to the way things were. He pulled back, studying my face. What do you mean? I mean, I've spent 34 years defining myself solely as your mother. It's time I remembered I'm also Lorraine, a woman with her own identity and potential. The next morning, I called the number on Richard Thompson's card. His assistant put me through immediately. Lorraine, he greeted me warmly. I was hoping you'd call. That guest lecturer position, I said, surprising myself with my directness. Were you serious? Absolutely. We're doing a special seminar series on feminist perspectives in 20th century literature next semester. Your expertise would be invaluable. It's been 3 decades since I stood in front of a classroom, I warned. Some skills never leave us, he replied. And I suspect you have perspectives now that your younger self couldn't have imagined. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a small office at Grayson University, reviewing course materials and preparing lecture notes. The familiar rhythm of academic work came back to me with surprising ease. I felt energized in a way I hadn't in years, engaging with ideas and texts that had once been the center of my world. Andrew kept his word about making changes. He scheduled a meeting with the firm's partners, where he confessed to his fabrications and apologized for his behavior at the party. There were consequences: a formal reprimand in his file, the extended probation from client contact. But Richard later told me that Andrew's honesty had ultimately earned him respect. More importantly, Andrew began the difficult process of rebuilding our relationship on more authentic terms. Sunday dinners resumed, but now with meaningful conversation rather than polite small talk. He asked questions about my academic work, genuinely interested in this aspect of my identity he had never known. Jessica did not return. Apparently her assessment of Andrew's character flaw had been final. But in time, he began dating a public defender named Natalie, who seemed refreshingly unpretentious and genuinely kind. 6 months after that fateful birthday party, I stood in front of a lecture hall for the first time in over 30 years, discussing Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own with 70 undergraduates. My hands trembled slightly as I began, but my voice grew stronger with each passing minute. Andrew sat in the back row, having taken the afternoon off to witness this milestone. When the class ended and the students filed out, he approached with a proud smile. "Professor Matthews," he said, using the name I'd chosen for my return to academia. "That was incredible." "It felt right," I admitted, like finding a piece of myself I'd misplaced long ago. Richard joined us, having slipped in during the lecture. "The department has received 3 emails already praising your class. I'd like to discuss expanding your role next semester if you're interested." That evening, the 3 of us had dinner at a modest restaurant near campus. As we discussed literature education and the firm's recent cases, I realized how completely my life had transformed in less than a year. From the invisible mother to the respected professor. From the woman who defined herself solely through her son to someone reclaiming her own identity. To new beginnings, Richard toasted, raising his glass. And to remembering where we came from, Andrew added, meeting my eyes with genuine respect. The path forward wasn't perfectly smooth. Andrew still occasionally slipped into status-conscious behavior. I sometimes struggled with balancing my rekindled academic passion with the comfortable routines of my previous life. But we were both growing, both learning to see each other as complete individuals rather than just mother and son. The most unexpected development came 1 year after the party, when Richard asked me to dinner. Just the 2 of us. Our professional relationship had gradually evolved into a warm friendship, and that evening it took another turn entirely. "I've admired you since I was 20 years old," he confessed over dessert. "First as a brilliant professor, now as a remarkable woman who rebuilt her life with extraordinary grace." At 59, romance had been so far from my mind that his interest caught me completely by surprise. But I found myself saying yes to a second date and then a third. When I finally told Andrew about this new development in my life, he was initially stunned, but quickly recovered. "You deserve happiness, Mom," he said sincerely. "And Richard is a good man." "He is," I agreed, "but so is his son." Andrew's journey toward becoming the man I always knew he could be continues, as does my journey to balance being a mother with being my own person. The painful moment of being introduced as just the housekeeper ultimately led to something I never could have anticipated: the rediscovery of myself. Life takes unexpected turns. Sometimes the most painful moments lead to new beginnings we couldn't have imagined. And sometimes the person we were always meant to be was waiting patiently for us to remember her existence. Have you ever experienced a painful moment that ultimately led to positive change in your life? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about life's unexpected journeys. And remember, sometimes being underestimated is just the opportunity you need to rediscover your own worth. Thank you for listening to my story today, and may you find the courage to embrace both who you are and who you might become.